All right, Isaiah 54. Let's call this one Forget the Shame. In this chapter where God is calling his people to forget the shame of their captivity, comparing them to a barren woman who is forgetting the shame of being childless because she is now blessed with children, a concept that Paul is going to quote or rely on in the book of Galatians as he is likewise encouraging New Testament Christians. Understanding, however, in this chapter, it is roughly going to take the shape of God telling them to do at least three things, followed by a four statement, helping them to understand why. Verse 1 starting off with, "Sing, O barren woman who did not bear," the latter half of the verse saying, "For the children of the desolate one will be more than the children of her who is married, says the Lord." Second thing he calls them to do in verse 2 being, "Enlarge the place of your tent." Why? Because in verse 3, "For you will spread abroad to the right and to the left, and your offspring will possess the nations." Third thing he tells them to do being in verse 4, "Fear not, for you will not be ashamed." Going on again to say, for you will forget the shame of your youth. Thus the title. And in verse 5, "For your maker is your husband." He's going to say in verse 6, "For the Lord has called you like a wife deserted and grieved in spirit." He's going to say in verse 7, "For a brief moment he was the one who deserted them, but those days are over." Because now in verse 8, he's going to say, "In the overflowing anger for a moment he hid his face from them, but with everlasting love he is now going to have compassion on them." As in verse 9, he's going to give an illustration talking about the ways they can trust the fact that his love or the compassion he's showing them now is not temporary, likening it to the days of Noah, when he swore that the waters of Noah would no longer go on the earth or cover the earth. He's going to say, likewise, he will no longer be angry and rebuke them, at least in this way. Verse 10 saying, "For the mountains may depart and the hills may be removed, but his steadfast love shall not depart from them." So he will go on in the last portion of the chapter, verses 11 through 17, to lead into another famous verse concluding the passage, as verse 11 is going to say, "O afflicted one, I will set your stones. I will make your pinnacles. I will teach your children, and great shall be their peace." The setting of the stones in verse 11 and the making of the pinnacles in verse 12 reminds me of something that we've seen before, and that is the way in which God both provides us protection against external enemies and internal enemies. Understanding the way in which I referred before to a Christian artist who said that at times my greatest enemy is my inner me. And so as God provides them protection from external enemies, he is likewise counseling them in the ways that will prevent them from destroying their own peace, a concept that we have seen before. In order to do that, verse 14 is also going to remind us of a concept that he showed us in his conversation or his words to King Cyrus, the way that he was going to establish all these things in righteousness. Understanding that just doing right, as we sometimes say in the South, is really the foundation for peace in a lot of ways. God going on to say in verse 15, "If anyone does stir up strife with them, it is not coming from him. And whoever stirs up strife with them is going to fall because of the strife they have stirred with his people." Verse 16 going on to say, "Behold, he has created a smith who is going to produce a weapon, presumably in defense of them," leading into the last verse of the chapter, a very famous passage reading, "No weapon that is fashioned against you shall succeed, and you shall confute every tongue that rises against you in judgment. This is the heritage of the servants of the Lord, and their vindication from me, declares the Lord." The thing that stood out in this chapter most, quite possibly being our title passage. He's calling them to forget their shame. However, the conclusion also stood out to me in the way that he is not simply calling them to forget their shame and telling them, now you're on your own. He is bringing them back into a situation where once again, their success seems effortless. And as we continue to rely on the stories of Ezra and Nehemiah for a practical view of what this period of history would eventually look like, we get a chance to see that the road to an effortless stage in their life came through a lot of difficulty during the resettlement and the rebuilding period, helping us to understand that even though God has, as we'll see in the New Testament in books like First Peter, a salvation prepared or already for us, we have to understand, as Peter will also remind us, that the road there involves a lot of difficulty. And much like the days of Ezra and Nehemiah, that difficulty gave them the advantage of appreciating, one, what they had already lost, and two, what they now had a chance to recover. And insofar as God not only gives us the opportunity for an eternal peace, but he gives us the chance to recover portions of our peace here, my prayer for you is my prayer for me. That until it's time for him to call us home, we live the kind of lives that would encourage him to protect us from every weapon and every tongue.